Hello, my name is Pamela McKinney and this is my colleague Sheila, and this is a presentation that we jointly co-wrote for the Creating Knowledge 8 conference which took place in 2016 in Reykjavík. And the subject of the presentation is the two information literacy modules that are offered in the Information School at the University of Sheffield. So in the presentation today we're going to have a look at the context for the module, and then we're going to use Entwistle's et al.'s Teaching and Learning Environments model as a structure for the discussion of the modules in this presentation. The model contains 3 levels: the institutional environment and the teacher's characteristics, the learning design and the characteristics of the learners. So we're going to have a look at those 3 distinct levels for these 2 modules and then draw some conclusions at the end. So the information literacy modules are core modules for students on the face-to-face MA librarianship programme and the distance learning MA in Library and Information Services Management. In 2015, this was the first year of the distance learning programme in the university, and the modules run at the same time in semester 1, so that's starting in September and finishing at Christmas. These are the learning aims for both modules, and they cover both theoretical knowledge of and development of personal information literacy and the theory and practice of teaching. So the Economic and Social Research Council funding was used to look at teaching and learning in higher education, and it looked at teaching and learning in biological sciences, economics, electronic engineering and history. Staff were interviewed and questionnaires were collected from students that looked at their general and specific approaches to studying and learning, and these were followed up by interviews. And this then created the model that we're using here as well. This research project also created the threshold concepts. A threshold concept is something that radically changes our understanding, where something that had previously been inaccessible can be incorporated into our thinking and interpretation of a subject or worldview. Threshold concepts in information literacy in higher education, as expressed by academic librarians, were used to help design the new ACRL framework for information literacy. And the findings from this ETL project have had a strong impact on teaching and learning generally in higher education. This is a generic conceptual framework developed from the ETL project, and the focal concept for the model is the quality of the learning achieved, although we note that this is often difficult to judge. The concept of constructive alignment was developed through the project activities, and this is the principle that the aims and assessment of any course should be oriented towards higher level learning outcomes and developing conceptual understanding. We note that constructivism has become a pedagogical orthodoxy in much HE teaching. For the purposes of this presentation, we're going to have a look at 3 distinct levels in the teaching and learning environment. So firstly, the internal and external environment in which the teaching takes place, and we're going to reflect on our characteristics as teachers, including our pedagogical beliefs and assumptions. Secondly, we look at the design and implementation of the teaching and learning environment for the 2 cohorts, including our choices about the technological tools that we use to connect with our distance learners. Thirdly, we're looking at the characteristics of our learners and how we opened up discussion about learning and teaching as part of the module activities. The particular conditions of the teaching and learning environment model look at a number of different subjects, and it's useful for students to use this model as a way to reflect on their own learning and teaching and the environment in which they're experiencing it. So we're going to have a look at our subject knowledge and pedagogical beliefs firstly. So Pam has a background as a learning developer, working specifically to extend and develop inquiry-based learning at the university, working for a Centre for Excellence in Teaching and Learning from 2005 to 2010. My research interests look at the relationship between inquiry-based learning and information literacy, and how information literacy can be taught in an inquiry-based way. Sheila has enormous expertise in technology-enhanced learning and inquiry-based learning. She's taught in Second Life and in MOOCs and has research experience in phenomenography. Her experience with teaching has been recognised with an Institutional Teaching Award. Our understanding of information literacy and what it means come from a theoretical and practical perspective, looking at information literacy in different communities and landscapes. We have both internalised our threshold moment of realising that we couldn't just transfer our knowledge to the students by talking at them. Novice teachers often do this. But we notice also that radically altering programmes requires a lot of buy-in from staff. The development of a new distance learning programme allowed a small team of lecturers with technology-enhanced learning and teaching interest to work together on the design and delivery of teaching at a distance. We're building on the experience of delivering the distance learning programme in health informatics in the department, but also we found it was an opportunity to do things a little bit differently. The first year was very much an experiment. We reflect annually on all our modules, prompted by student evaluations. We didn't want to create a teaching tips and tricks module for our students, as so much of teaching is contextual and ultimately it's not useful for students who may go into a huge variety of sectors, institutions and job roles. Rather, this module aims to stimulate interest in some of the theories of teaching that can act as a platform for future teaching and future professional development. There's a financial drive within the university to recruit more students and extend our markets, and this led to the creation of the distance learning programme. There's been a slow but steady increase in distance learning programmes, as this is seen as a way to increase market without increasing physical infrastructure, and there's been a growth of a technology-enhanced learning community at the university and appointment of senior staff champions in technology-enhanced learning. Better teaching technology enables us to teach a more dynamic distance learning programme. We've had to conform to university policies and procedures around module creation, and we're constrained by university policies such as word count, a limit of 3,000 words for the assignment for a particular module. This has meant that the use of long reflective portfolios, which we might have chosen as an assessment method, have been impossible. So the two programmes for which this information literacy module is core have been accredited by CILIP, the Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals. The professional knowledge and skills base, which contains the core knowledge and skills of the profession, is used as a framework to assess our programmes. But CILIP are also interested in the quality of the learning experience, how we engage with employers to ensure programme relevance, and how up-to-date staff are with the requirements of the profession. They are also keen that we encourage student engagement with CILIP. The Quality Assurance Agency framework is used in the UK to judge if courses are fit for purpose, and they work with accreditation organisations to determine the subject competencies that are needed by students who study that course. The Quality Assurance Agency states that LIS graduates should be able to understand the concept of information literacy and its application in education, the workplace and society. They ask that students understand other literacies such as digital, archival, visual, etc., and their development and application in recreation, education, the workplace and society. We also need to look at the role of the information professional in developing such literacies. The QAA also want us to understand the role of the information professional and information agencies in developing information literacy, promoting reading for education and recreation, and in supporting learning. We are a research-led institution, and Masters, PhD and staff research has fed into the module content and activities. So, for example, Sheila Correll and Alison Buick were looking at the pedagogical knowledge of librarians, Emily Wheeler looking at librarians' conceptions of themselves as teachers, and Eva Hornung looking at continuing professional development of one-person librarians in Ireland. Both modules share the same subject, sequence and assessment, but the tools that we use to deliver the teaching are very different in the face-to-face environment and the distance learning versions of this module. Constructive alignment is the principles that intended learning outcomes specify the activity that students should engage in if they are to achieve the outcomes, as well as the content that the activity refers to. The teacher has to set up the learning environment that encourages the students to perform the learning activities and then to assess the student performance against the intended learning outcomes. So in these modules there are two overarching strands: what is information literacy and what is teaching and learning. There are practical activities that are linked to expected progression on assessment tasks and are placed at particular points in the module to support students in their assessed activities. The theoretical material is dealt with towards the end of the module to ensure that students have had the teaching that directly relates to the assessment at a timely manner. There is front-loading of both modules to cover more material at the start, which leaves time for students to complete the assessment towards the end of the semester. So in the face-to-face class, the learning happens mostly in a 3-hour class on a Monday morning, and for the distance learners, the focus is on providing content and facilitating interaction so that students can manage in their own time. There are some synchronous activities, but equally some activities that students can do by themselves. So here are some of the principal tools that we use. We have an enterprise Google platform at the university, and our main channel of communication with students outside of face-to-face teaching is by email. We experimented with a Google Plus group for the new distance learning students as a way to foster interaction and create a learning community. Early indications are that students liked engaging in this medium, and we hosted a number of stimulating discussions on Google Plus. Students were confident to post questions and initiate discussions with each other. Potentially this is seen to be more user-friendly than the VLE, as students have control of their avatars and they seem to be more in control of the environment as a whole. We use Google Drive to make documents available to users, for example FAQs, and to give students the opportunity to collaboratively create documents. Students were encouraged to use Drive to collaboratively create their coursework. This is a screenshot from the university's virtual learning environment, which is hosted on the Blackboard platform, and each module has its own environment. The design was broadly similar, but the content differed slightly by module. There was an ability to host documents, web links to other resources, videos and discussion boards. Here is a screenshot of a service called Padlet, which is a web-based virtual post-it app. This is easy for students to contribute ideas, so for example definitions of information literacy. There's a pleasing interface, and it opens up awareness of different platforms and functionalities that could be used in their own teaching. I'm not showing the original due to the replication of the student names. And this is YouTube, which I'm sure most of you will be familiar with, and it's used for hosting videos for the course. We had an experimental approach, and we wanted to explore different functionalities, both for our own teaching, but also as a way to stimulate reflection and interest in our learners for their own development as teachers. The diversity of platform account for individual differences and preferences. So Adobe Connect is a video conferencing platform that allowed us to run live interactive sessions with the distance learning students, although it was used in face-to-face sessions for one guest speaker who was unable to travel to Sheffield. We can present a PowerPoint with video, voice or text chat with learners. We can provide links to learning materials and have breakout discussion rooms for learners. All sessions are recorded and made available on the virtual learning environment so that learners who couldn't attend in person are able to catch up. Echo 360 is our personal lecture capture software. This software allows us to create recorded PowerPoint presentations at our desktop with optional video, and the recordings can then be uploaded to YouTube or linked to in the virtual learning environment. A good asynchronous option that can be used also for flipped classroom teaching at the university. We encourage our learners to experiment with different platforms and services for their own teaching, in particular for the activity of creating their own information literacy tutorial. They surprised us with the depth of their creativity and their willingness to adapt and use different platforms to create quizzes, presentations and learning materials. We asked students to engage with and assess information literacy tutorials, such as this one provided by our own university library, as a way to understand how information literacy is supported currently by universities. So I'm going to cover here what students are expected to learn and understand through looking at the assignments. So assignment 1 is to create an annotated bibliography on a topic negotiated with a tutor and to reflect on how their personal information literacy has been developed through doing the activity. And this enabled us to interact with the learners and offer them targeted support and advice with their information literacy searching and also their topic selection. For assignment 2, students had to work in groups to design an information literacy learning intervention, and this was not assessed. They then had to critically reflect on the experience of designing and delivering information literacy teaching and their personal development as teachers. We paired up groups of distance learning and face-to-face students, and they were asked to provide each other with an information literacy learning need that provided the context for their information literacy teaching. We thought that this would enable the teaching to be low stakes so that students would not be too stressed about the actual teaching itself, as only the reflection, which is individual, is assessed rather than the teaching. These activities assess both the theoretical understanding and practical application of information literacy and learning and teaching material. This is an example of a model activity that was used in the modules from both the face-to-face and the distance learning perspective. The activity was to reflect on an experience of finding information and identify the sources used. So with the face-to-face students, they were asked to post to a Blackboard discussion forum before the face-to-face teaching session. And then in the session itself, following a short lecture covering some theoretical aspects of information horizons, they were asked to discuss their post with a partner or a small group and kind of bring in a discussion of the theoretical material. We then had a plenary discussion led by the tutor where individuals' experiences were discussed and points of interest in comparison were surfaced. For the distance learning students, in the week before the session, they were asked to post to their Google Plus group. A lecture was recorded with audio and visual components, and this was made available on the virtual learning environment. And then students were encouraged to reflect on their original post in the light of the material covered on Information Horizons and to post again. I then made a short feedback video to look at the points of interest that the students had raised in their reflections. So looking at the entry characteristics of the students, the distance learning students are mostly working while studying and they're only part-time students. The face-to-face students had more full-time students, but they all have previous experience working in an information context. The face-to-face students were a quarter international and the distance learning students only 1/10 international, so there were more home students in the distance learning cohort. The students come from a range of subject backgrounds and they have a range of undergraduate degree subjects. However, we can't see what they are from the student management system, so it makes getting to know our learners slightly problematic. We know that students learn in different ways and that one approach to teaching isn't suitable for all students. However, we also needed our learners to recognise this, both for themselves personally, as this can be helpful for their own studying, but also for their development as teachers so they can make more informed choices about their learning designs. Knowing this ourselves encourages us to challenge our assumptions about our own teaching. There are lots of different models of learning styles which are presented and discussed, and students actively engage with some of them as learners. The VARC, Visual, Oral, Kinesthetic, Read, Write model is useful because they can access the online questionnaire for free, and potentially they could use this with their own students. We asked students to comment on the results that they got for the Approaches to Study inventory designed by Entwistle and Tate, and both modules had a virtual learning environment discussion board set up. However, through analysis looking at these posts, we found that the distance learning students were more active in the discussion activities. However, we don't know what informal discussion the face-to-face students might have had while they've been engaging with each other. We really wanted students to be reflected about their learning throughout both the modules. We found that students have very different perceptions of the same teaching and learning environment. So some students have reported that they've just had a lecture course and haven't realised the range of activities that they've been engaged in. We realised from the lecturer's perspective that it's not our job to make everyone happy, but if we're trying to achieve conceptual change, then inevitably some people will be unhappy, as going through a threshold can be an uncomfortable experience. Accepting that information literacy is a subject is not where all library students want to go, and some don't accept that they will have to be teachers. However, our experience of library and information science work has shown us that everyone has to teach someone something. Our experience as educators has taught us that students don't always realise the value of what they're doing at the point at which it's delivered. However, we are quite certain that they will find the value as in their professional lives. Looking at the quality of the learning achieved, there's a problem here in that we don't really know how we can identify this effectively. Obviously, we can look at the assignments that students have produced, but unfortunately we don't focus on skills, and instead we focus on personal development and conceptual development. So how can we measure this? So the information score procedure is that students complete a model evaluation questionnaire with a mix of quantitative and qualitative data. Anecdotally, we know that students want good marks and generally have experience of high marks. And we wonder whether students feel validated by getting a good mark. The failure rate for both the modules is very low, and the reflective assignments allow us to understand a bit more about how and what students feel they have learned. However, we acknowledge that that strategic learners could simply write what they think the lecturer wants to read. Further research is ongoing with these learners as a way to complete an action research cycle. So in conclusion, the multimodal method in the distance learning environment we think possibly engages students more and gives wider opportunities for different types of engagement. We believe that some of the activities and software that we use could be extended into the face-to-face module. In particular, this could involve providing videos of lecture content and focusing more on discussion and development activities in the face-to-face sessions themselves. There was a creative use of different learning platforms, and this worked well for both cohorts. We found that the distance learning students being in work allowed them to more immediately contextualise their learning through discussion and observation, particularly as some of them are already involved in teaching activities. Both Sheila and I enjoyed planning and delivering the distance learning module, and we found the contrast between the two sets of students very interesting. The reflections prompted by creating this presentation had been taken forward as part of a larger research project looking more closely at the distance learning experience. We also note that being in class seemed to promote a more passive and judgmental view of the learning, and we need to work on creating the online learning ethos in the classroom. And these are the references for the presentation.